Everyone wants super easy to read tier lists. Nobody wants to go through so many picks and hear so much information that they just, waste their entire day. So we thought of something. We are going to make it easier for you. We cleaned up all the tiers, made a clear distinction between tiers, and made sure that the top of the picks in the highest tier, in the S tier, are the best available picks for every role. There will be no distinction within a tier, but the distinction between tiers is absolutely astronomical in a sense of overall viability. Champions in the highest tier have the highest impact and are the strongest champions overall, and champions below that get worse and worse and worse. We are usually looking at early game to mid game impact or late game power potential and carry potential. If your champion cannot lane and it's absolutely useless in the early game, it's very likely that your champion will be placed very low, and if your champion has super high power in the early, mid and late game, your champion will be absolutely broken and therefore in the S tier. But now, with all things cleared, let's talk about our question of the day. What is your S tier champion in your lane? Let me know in the comments below. For our first champion in the Baron lane, we have Gwen. This champion has a decent laning phase if you start with your first ability. If you have access to the laning phase, or rather the minions, and can stack up your ability really early, you have an easier way of trading enemy champions once they're getting too close to last hit minions. But there's one thing you really need to pay attention to, and that is Fiora. Fiora is a really crazy champion when it comes to beating up your champion in the early stages of the game. You need to be really careful not to mess up in the early stages, because if she snowballs against you, things get really troublesome for you. One of the most important things when it comes to Gwen Baron lane is that you don't mess up your wave state. If you constantly end up in front of the enemy tower with a wave in front of it and unable to crash it, you're an easy victim for the enemy jungle, and running you down, since you're most likely running Ghost and Ignite, will be an easy feat if they have any type of lockdown. However, once you achieve that and are level 5, then it's a different story. You have an easier way of doing 1v2 scenarios once you have access to your ultimate ability, since all your damage is AoE, and if they trade into it and don't pay too much attention to it, you can just instantly kill them with your third cast of your ultimate ability combined with your first ability. Another thing you have to keep in mind is the mind game around your second ability. If you, for example, know that the enemy is a Pantheon or any type of champion with a certain ability that stuns you or CCs you in any kind of way, you can use your second ability to bait it and make it autocast on a minion. This is something very niche and won't work every time, but if you're already winning and are inside of your opponent's head, this can be the difference between winning even harder. And this is our full tier list for the Baron lane. Next up, we have the jungle role, and here we have Diana as our pick of the patch. This champion has been a menace to society in the Rift, and it's continuing to do so. She loves to fully clear her jungle and then hit certain item breakpoints to then completely take over the Rift, and it's super easy to do so. The only thing you have to keep in mind as a Diana is two decisions. Number one is going for the full burst Luden's Echo build, which will allow you to completely annihilate any squishy champion on the enemy team. The other build is the tankier version, which is really helpful against super bruisers or other tank champions, which consists of Rod of Ages. With this, you'll have an easier time surviving the enemy burst and then taking over the game. Depending on what you do, you will obviously have to adjust the build afterwards to a slight degree, but generally speaking, Rod of Ages into Rabadon's Death Cap is a whole lot of AP and you'll demolish people with it. Ideally speaking, you want to clear yourself up towards your other side of the map, starting with your Kruk camp. With this, you have an easy full clear and there's not too much happening to you. While you do so, you have the most amount of time while not losing anything in terms of efficiency as you go towards other lanes. Let's say you start with your Kruk camp and go towards your Raptor camp after you finished red buff. Then you have a brief moment in time to look at mid lane and decide, okay, what do I have to do? Do I have to clear mid wave? Do I have to help him? Or is there anything else going on? And can I use this to go for a scuttle crab or a proactive play on the other side of the jungle? With this, you have the easiest and safest clear at the same time without the loss of anything. And you should really look into this if you want to play jungle and have more impact without too much risk. For ganking, there's one thing you can abuse that makes it super easy to guarantee a gap closer on the enemy champion. If you spot that the enemy wave is still alive, you can use your first ability into the wave and then jump to the wave and then jump to an enemy, or just force them to use any kind of summoner spell because you're already close to them. Don't forget, minions will always behave the same and it's easier to hit them than to hit enemy champions, so if that isn't an option to hit an enemy champion, just go for the minion and then go for the other champions afterwards. And this is our full tier list for the jungle role. For our mid lane, we have an absolute power pick in the form of Akshan. This champion is an absolute lane bully and loves to go around the map and take over the map at the same time. The biggest issue with this champion is his stealth and allowing him to just go from lane to lane even if there's ward coverage. Even with the Scuttlecrab being around, he can just walk past it and not care. Another thing that all Akshan players love to do is cheesing. And let me tell you, an Akshan can cheese you quite well. If you walk into the river and if you follow an Akshan, he will just instantly kill you if he knows its spots and where to swing around. And also when it comes to diving, he can basically swing around any tower and kill you if he puts enough points into his third ability. Most people will not allocate too many points into the third ability, but if they do, and if you match them or go for a skirmish in the river, you will instantly get killed because the base damage on this ability is beyond absurd. Another reason why Akshan is so problematic in solo queue is the ability of him to revive people. He can basically trade his allies' lives to get another kill and then bring them all back without any worry on his mind. If you think about this and if you think about the chaotic nature of solo queue, he can really become one of the biggest issues in the game. And if he goes for the crit build, which allows him to deal so much bonus damage with basically every attack, his third ability and his ultimate, he will one-shot you if you get too close to him. There's only one downside to this champion. In the later stages of the game, he finds it very difficult to find impact unless the enemy used their cooldowns already. You can think of him as a similar champion like Katarina, that if they just go in or swing around, get instantly killed if the enemy is somewhat human in the way they are playing their champions. But if the Akshan is patient enough and waits for flanks or basically assassinates people, he has super high value in all of his games and can take over games from the get-go with little to no counterplay, because this champion is a real demon when it comes to bullying people in solo queue. He loves chaos, and if you love chaos, you should definitely give Akshan a try. This is our full tier list for the mid lane. For our Dragon lane or for our AD carry position, we have Lucian as our pick of the patch. This champion is a very lane dominant champion that can take over games from level 1 onwards and makes it very easy if you have the mechanical skill to just dominate the enemy champions. However, there's one certain catch when you want to play Lucian. You need to be mechanically skilled enough to pull off such an AD carry. Most of the AD carry players will hate to hear this, but you're better off just playing a mage. You'll have more impact in a way easier fashion without making yourself go nuts over mechanics. Most of the time, people will lose their minds over any type of plays and they'll force themselves to continuously go for plays because they look good, but then they end up dying because they are literally incapable of pulling off what they thought of in their own minds. This is something that happens very frequently, and if it happens to you, don't worry about it, it's completely normal. It's easier for us if it just happens in our minds, but if you have to execute it in the heat of the moment with pressure involved and a lot of variables at play, we will just not be able to pull it off. If you are, however, able to at least have somewhat of a decent understanding of the AD carry role and your mechanics on that champion or those champions, AD carry is really broken in a solo queue environment. There are many people constantly mispositioning right in front of you. You can punish them if you understand what is a threat and what is not. If you learn this threat measurement and basically learn to passively count cooldowns in your head, you'll have an absolute great time as an AD carry and will get many solo kills during the laning phase, in mid game or even the late game. Enemy champions, depending on what champions they are playing, turn to absolute useless pieces of meat if they have used those cooldowns. You as a Lucian, however, once you have your cooldowns available, you're a very mobile champion that loves to get really close and one-tap enemies in a short burst rotation. If you think about this and utilize Brutal and Kraken Slayer really well, from the laning start you can dominate people, poking them out with your first ability, going in with your third ability and just making sure you get all those passive procs in and chunk out the enemy without real counterplay on their end. TLDR, if the enemy is really bad, AD carry becomes beyond broken because you can rack up so many kills you can't even count them. And this is our full tier list for the Dragon lane. Last but not least, we have to talk about the support role, and here we have Pyke. In Legendary queue or generally solo queue, it has become more prevalent that the support champion is not going into the normal lane, which is the Dragon lane, on level 1. They go for proactive plays on the map and try to accelerate the map through a cheese play in top lane, rather the Baron lane, or mid lane, maybe even invading with their jungle. Those champions really want to get the game starting and take an advantage in their early power. For example, a Pyke walks into the Baron lane level 1 and goes with his top laner right into the brush. What happens if the enemy champion face checks you? He will either die or lose a summoner spell. Then, since Pyke is running a relic shield, the enemy top laner will not have enough time to go base and go for the XP with a fully reset resource bar. Another thing you have to understand is that Pyke can literally cheese and one-shot an entire wave with one relic stack. If his top laner, or generally speaking anyone, hits the minions below a certain threshold and every minion is on the threshold for getting executed, Pyke can one-hit the entire wave with relic shield. It's a glitch, or rather you can't really fix it because, well, how would you do it with a cleaving alt attack, but it's something you can abuse when you want to get advantages for yourself. Another thing that's really broken about Pyke is that his ultimate ability can not only be used as an execute, but also as an engage tool. And here's how. Utilizing your third ability and then casting your ultimate right behind an enemy champion will make it so that your third ability will go through them and stun them. That way you can engage a fight and then cast your first ability to hook them right into your team, and there's not much the enemy can do about this, because to react to this play, you need to have the most insane reflexes and foresight and even know about its existence. If you don't, you will instantly die and your team will lose the game. And since Pyke can just Zhonya's, or rather use stasis, there's not much you can do to him as long as he has follow-up. If he has follow-up and things turn out as planned, he even gets a second Zhonya's depending on how many kills fall in sequence. But generally speaking, you only want to do that once in probably 10 times because you lose your ultimate ability, which is a huge part of your kit. But if it is the play, you will look absolutely stunning and it's deadly at the same time. Another thing you probably didn't know about is that if Pyke lets his hook time out, the cooldown will be refunded by 50%. This can mess up the perception of enemy champions that your spell is still on cooldown and get them into positions where you might get them killed because you're allowed to hook them. So whenever you don't know if you can hit your first ability, just let it time out and then you'll see a cooldown refund and mana refund right back at you. Then you have an easier time capitalizing on maybe enemy mistakes at the same time. And this is our full tier list for the support role. And that wraps up today's video. Thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed the content, come back for more Rift Guides content soon. See ya!